Yeah, I can see now. Gah. My settings all went weird for some reason. Including my monitor. That's a shame, I was getting into it. Just cut a lot of stuff out. But that's my fault. Oh well. Ugh. Stupid OBS. Next time I'll have to make sure that if anything goes wrong with the monitors, it also doesn't mess with the sound, which it seems to have done. But never mind. We didn't miss very much, so I can always step back. Okay. Right, so what I was saying was last we left off, we had left Arthur and Ford on the bridge of the Heart of Gold, having just met up again with Ford's cousin, the slightly eccentric Zaphod Beeblebrox, and the woman that Arthur failed entirely to get off with at a local party back on Earth, Trisha McMillan, aka Trillian, who was whisked away by Zaphod, pretending to be some guy while gate crashing a party. And now, having just landed on the Heart of Gold, after testing the infinite improbability drive that allows them to pass through multiple points of the universe simultaneously, thanks to the power of improbability, they now, well, are about to go on more adventures, so we'll see. So, Chapter 14. The Heart of Gold fled on silently through the night of space, now on conventional photon drive. Its crew of 4 were ill at ease, knowing that they had been brought together not of their own volition or by simple coincidence, but by some curious perversion of physics, as if relationships between people were susceptible to the same laws that governed the relationships between atoms and molecules. As the ship's artificial night closed in, they were each grateful to retire to separate cabins and try to rationalise their thoughts. Trillian couldn't sleep. She sat on a couch and stared up at a small cage which contained her last and only links with Earth. 2 white mice that she had insisted Zaphod let her bring. She had expected never to see the planet again, but she was disturbed by her negative reaction to the news of the planet's destruction. It seemed remote and unreal, and she could find no thoughts to think about it. She watched the mice scurrying round the cage and running furiously in their little plastic treadwheels till they occupied her whole attention. Suddenly she shook herself and went back to the bridge to watch over the tiny flashing lights and figures that charted the ship's progress through the void. She wished she knew what she was trying not to think about. Zaphod couldn't sleep. He also wished he knew what it was that he wouldn't let himself think about. For as long as he could remember, he'd suffered from a vague nagging feeling of being not all there. Most of the time he was able to put this thought aside and not worry about it, but it had been reawakened by the sudden, inexplicable arrival of Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent. Somehow it seemed to conform to a pattern that he couldn't see. Ford couldn't sleep. He was too excited about being back on the road again. 15 years of virtual imprisonment were over, just as he was finally beginning to give up hope. Knocking about with Zaphod for a bit promised to be a lot of fun, though there seemed to be something faintly odd about his semi-cousin that he couldn't put his finger on. The fact that he had become president of the galaxy was frankly astonishing, as was the manner of leaving his post. Was there a reason behind it? There would be no point in asking Zaphod. He never appeared to have a reason for anything he did at all. He had turned unfathomability into an art form. He attacked everything in life with a mixture of extraordinary genius and naive incompetence, and it was often difficult to tell which was which. Arthur slept. He was terribly tired. There was a tap at Zaphod's door. It slid open. Zaphod? Yeah? Gonna move myself over a little bit. I'm also very, very not mouthy movie today, for some reason. Ah, ah. My mouth just doesn't seem to want to work. Less so than usual. Oh well. There was a tap at Zaphod's door. It slid open. Zaphod? Yeah? Trillian stood outlined in the oval of light. I think we just found what you came to look for. Hey, yeah? Ford gave up the attempt to sleep. In the corner of his cabin was a small computer screen and keyboard. He sat at it for a while and tried to compose a new entry for the guide on the subject of Vogons, but couldn't think of anything vitrolic enough, so he gave that up, too, wrapped a robe around himself and went for a walk to the bridge. As he entered, he was surprised to see two figures hunched excitedly over the instruments. See? The ship's about to move into orbit, Trillian was saying. There's a planet out there. It's the exact coordinates you predicted. Zaphod heard noise and looked up. Ford, he hissed. Hey, come and look at this. Ford went and had a look at it. It was a series of figures flickering over a screen. You recognize those galactic coordinates? Said Zaphod. No. I'll give you a clue. Computer! Hi, gang, enthused the computer. This is getting real sociable, isn't it? Shut up, said Zaphod, and show up the screens. Light on the bridge sank. Pinpoints of light played across the consoles and reflected in 4 pairs of eyes that stared up at the external monitor screens. There was absolutely nothing on them. Recognize that? Whispered Zaphod. Ford frowned. No, he said. What do you see? Nothing. Recognize it? What are you talking about? We're in the Horsehead Nebula, one whole vast dark cloud. And I was meant to recognize that from a blank screen. Inside a dark nebula is the only place in the galaxy you'd see a dark screen. Very good. Zaphod laughed. He was clearly very excited about something, almost childishly so. Hey, this is really terrific. This is just far too much. What's so great about being stuck in a dust cloud? Said Ford. What would you reckon to find here? Urged Zaphod. Nothing. No stars, no planets. No. Computer, shouted Zaphod. Rotate angle of vision through 180 degrees and don't talk about it. For a moment it seemed like nothing was happening. Then a brightness glowed at the edge of the huge screen. A red star the size of a small plate crept across it, followed quickly by another one, a binary system. Then a vast crescent sliced into the corner of the picture, a red glare shading away into deep black, the night side of a planet. I found it, cried Zaphod, thumping the console. I found it! Ford stared at it in astonishment. What is it? He said. That, said Zaphod, is the most improbable planet that ever existed. Chapter 15. Excerpt from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, page 634784, section 5a. Entry, Magrathea. Far back in the midst of ancient times, in the great and glorious days of the former galactic empire, life was wild, rich, and largely tax-free. Mighty starships plied their way between exotic suns, seeking adventure and reward amongst the furthest reaches of galactic space. In those days, spirits were brave, the stakes were high, men were real men, and women were real women, and small furry creatures from Alpha Centauri were real furry creatures from Alpha Centauri. And all dared to brave unknown terrors, to do mighty deeds, to boldly split infinitives that no man had split before, and thus was the Empire forged. Many men, of course, became extremely rich, but this was perfectly natural and nothing to be ashamed of, because no one was really poor, at least no one worth speaking of. And for all the richest and most successful merchants, life inevitably became rather dull and niggly, and they began to imagine that this was, therefore, the fault of the worlds they'd settled on. None of them were entirely satisfactory. Either the climate wasn't quite right, or the later part of the afternoon, or the in the later part of the afternoon, or the day was half an hour too long, or the sea was exactly the wrong shade of pink. And thus were created the conditions for a staggering new form of specialist industry, custom-made luxury planet building. The home of this industry was the planet Magrathea, where hyperspatial engineers sucked matter through white holes in space to form it into dream planets. Gold planets, platinum planets, soft rubber planets with lots of earthquakes, all lovingly made to meet the exacting standards that the galaxy's richest men naturally came to expect. But so successful was this venture that Magrathea itself soon became the richest planet of all time, and the rest of the galaxy was reduced to abject poverty. And so the system broke down, the empire collapsed, and a long sullen silence settled over 1 billion hungry worlds, disturbed only by the pen-scratchings of scholars as they laboured into the night over smug little treaties on the value of a planned political economy. Magrathea itself disappeared, and its memory soon passed into the obscurity of legend. In these enlightened days, of course, no one believes a word of it. Chapter 16. Arthur awoke to the sound of argument and went to the bridge. Ford was waving his arms about. "You're crazy, Zaphod," he was saying. "Magrathea is a myth, a fairy story. It's what parents tell their kids about at night if they want them to grow up to become economists. It's..." "And that's what we are currently in orbit about," insisted Zaphod. "Look, I can't help what you may personally be in orbit about," said Ford, "but this ship..." "Computer!" "Oh no." "Hi there, this is Eddie, your shipboard computer, and I'm feeling just great, guys. And I know I'm just going to get a bundle of kicks out of any program you care to run through me." Arthur looked inquiringly at Trillian. She motioned him to come on in, but kept quiet. "Computer," said Zaphod, "tell us again what our present trajectory is." "A real pleasure, fella," it burbled. "We are currently in orbit at an altitude of 300 miles around the legendary planet of Magrathea." "Proving nothing," said Ford. "I wouldn't trust that computer to speak my weight." "I can do that for you, sure," enthused the computer, punching out more ticker tape. "I can even work out your personality problems to 10 decimal places if it will help." Trillian interrupted. "Zaphod," she said, "any minute now we will be swinging round the daylight side of this planet." Adding, "whatever it turns out to be." "Hey, what do you mean by that? That planet's where I predicted it would be, isn't it?" "Yes, I know there's a planet there. I'm not arguing with anyone. It's just I wouldn't know Magrathea from any other lump of cold rock. Dawn's coming up if you want it." Okay, muttered Zaphod. "Let's at least give our eyes a good time. Computer! Hi there, what can I..." "Just shut up and give us a view of the planet again." A dark, featureless mass once more filled the screens, the planet rolling away beneath them. They watched for a moment in silence, but Zaphod was fidgety with excitement. "We are now traversing the night side," said in a hushed voice. The planet rolled on. "The surface of the planet is now 300 miles beneath us," he continued. He was trying to restore a sense of occasion to what he felt should have been a great moment. Magrathea! He was piqued by Ford's sceptical reaction. Magrathea! "In a few seconds," he continued, "we should see. There!" The moment carried itself. Even the most seasoned star tramp can't help but shiver at the spectacular drama of a sunrise seen from space, but a binary sunrise is one of the marvels of the galaxy. Out of the utter blackness stabbed a sudden point of blinding light. It crept up by slight degree and spread sideways in a thin crescent blade, and within seconds 2 suns were visible, furnaces of light, searing the black edge of the horizon with white fire. Fierce shafts of colour streaked through the thin atmosphere between them. "The fires of dawn," breathed Zaphod. "The twin sons of Solianus and Ram." "Or whatever," said Ford quietly. "Solianus and Ram," insisted Zaphod. The suns blazed into a pitch of space, and low ghostly music floated through the bridge. Marvin was humming unironically because he hated humans so much. As Ford gazed at the spectacle of light before them, excitement burnt inside him, but only the excitement of seeing a strange new planet. Excuse me. It was enough for him to see it as it was. It faintly irritated him that Zaphod had to impose some ludicrous fantasy onto the scene to make it work for him. All this Magrathea nonsense seemed juvenile. Isn't it enough to see that a garden is beautiful without having to believe there are fairies at the bottom of it too? All this Magrathea business seemed totally incomprehensible to Arthur. He edged up to Trillian and asked her what was going on. "I only know what Zaphod's told me," she whispered. "Apparently Magrathea is some kind of legend from way back which no one seriously believes in. A bit like Atlantis on Earth, except the legends say that Magratheans used to manufacture planets." Arthur blinked at the screens and felt he was missing something important. Suddenly he realised what it was. "Is there any tea on this spaceship?" he asked. More of the planet was unfolding beneath them as the heart of gold streaked along its orbital path. The suns now stood high in the black sky. The pyrotechnics of dawn were over, and the surface of the planet appeared bleak and forbidding in the common light of day. Grey, dusty, and only dimly contoured. It looked dead and cold as a crypt. From time to time, promising features would appear on the distant horizon. Ravines, maybe mountains, maybe even cities. But as they approached, the lines would soften and blur into anonymity, and nothing would transpire. The planet's surface was blurred by time, by the slow movement of the thin, stagnant air that crept across it for century upon century. Clearly, it was very old. A moment of doubt came to Ford as he watched the grey landscape move beneath them. The immensity of time worried him. He could feel it as a presence. He cleared his throat. "Well, even supposing it is..." "It is," said Zaphod. "Which it isn't," continued Ford. "What do you want with it anyway? There's nothing there." "Not on the surface," said Zaphod. "All right, just supposing there's something. I take it you're not here for the sheer industrial archaeology of it all. What are you after?" One of Zaphod's heads looked away. The other one looked around to see what the first was looking at, but it wasn't looking at anything very much. "Well," said Zaphod airily, "it's partly the curiosity, partly a sense of adventure. But mostly I think it's the fame and the money." Ford glanced at him sharply. He got a very strong impression that Zaphod hadn't the faintest idea why he was there at all. "You know, I don't like the look of that planet at all," said Trillian, shivering. "Ah, take no notice," said Zaphod. "With half the wealth of the former galactic empire stored on it somewhere, it can afford to look frumpy." Bullshit, thought Ford. Even supposing this was the home of some ancient civilization now gone to dust, even supposing a number of exceedingly unlikely things, there was no way that vast treasures of wealth were going to be stored here in any form that would have any meaning now. He shrugged. "I think it's just a dead planet," he said. "The suspense is killing me," said Arthur testily. Stress and nervous tension are now serious social problems in all parts of the galaxy, and it is in order that this situation should not be in any way exacerbated that the following facts will now be revealed in advance. The planet in question is, in fact, the legendary Magrathea. The deadly missile attack shortly to be launched by an ancient automatic defence system will result merely in the breakage of 3 coffee cups and a mouse cage, the bruising of somebody's upper arm, and the untimely creation and sudden demise of a bowl of petunias and an innocent sperm whale. In order that some sense of mystery should still be preserved, no revelation will yet be made concerning whose upper arm sustains the bruise. This fact may safely be made the subject of suspense, since it is of no significance whatsoever. Chapter 17. After a fairly shaky start to the day, Arthur's mind was beginning to reassemble itself from the shell-shocked fragments of the previous day had left him with. He had found a nutrimatic machine which had provided him with a plastic cup filled with a liquid that was almost, but not quite, entirely unlike tea. The way it functioned was very interesting. When the drink button was pressed, it made an instant but highly detailed examination of the subject's taste buds, a spectroscopic analysis of the subject's metabolism, and then sent tiny experimental signals down the neural pathways to the taste centres of the subject's brain to see what was likely to go down well. However, no one knew quite why it did this, because it invariably delivered a cupful of liquid that was almost but not quite entirely unlike tea. The Nutramatic was designed and manufactured by the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation, whose complaints department now covers all the major landmasses of the first 3 planets in the Sirius Tau star system. Arthur drank the liquid and found it reviving. He glanced up at the screens again and watched a few more 100 miles of barren greyness slide past. It suddenly occurred to him to ask a question which had been bothering him. "Is it safe?" he said. "Magrathea's been dead for 5 million years, said Zaphod. "Of course it's safe. Even the ghosts will have settled down and raised families by now." At which point a strange and inexplicable sound thrilled suddenly through the bridge. A noise, as of distant fanfare, a hollow, reedy, insubstantial sound. It preceded a voice that was equally hollow, reedy, and insubstantial. The voice said, "Greetings to you." Someone from the dead planet was talking to them. "Computer!" shouted Zaphod. "Hi there." "What the photon is it?" "Oh, just some 5 million year old tape that's been broadcast at us." "A what? A recording?" "Shush," said Ford. "It's carrying on." The voice was old, courteous, almost charming, but was underscored with quite unmistakable menace. "This is a recorded announcement," it said. "As I'm afraid we're all out at the moment. The Commercial Council of Magrathea thanks you for your esteemed visit." "A voice from ancient Magrathea," shouted Zaphod. Okay, said Ford. "But regrets," continued the voice, "that the entire planet is temporarily closed for business. Thank you. If you would care to leave your name and address of a planet where you can be contacted, kindly speak when you hear the tone." A short buzz followed, then silence. "They want to get rid of us," said Trillian nervously. "What do we do?" "It's just a recording," said Zaphod. "We keep going. Got that, computer?" "I got it," said the computer and gave the ship an extra kick of speed. They waited. After a second or so came the fanfare once again, and then the voice. "We would like to assure you that as soon as our business is resumed, announcements will be made in all fashionable magazines and colour supplements, when our clients will once again be able to select from all that's best in contemporary geography." The menace in the voice took on a sharper edge. "Meanwhile, we thank our clients for the kind interest and would ask them to leave. Now." Arthur looked around the nervous faces of his companions. "Well, I suppose we'd better be going then, hadn't we?" he suggested. "Shh," said Zaphod. "There's absolutely nothing to be worried about." "Then why is everyone so tense?" "They're just interested," shouted Zaphod. "Computer, start a descent into the atmosphere and prepare for landing." This time the fanfare was quite perfunctory, the voice now distinctly cold. "It is most gratifying," it said, "that your enthusiasm for our planet continues unabated, and so we would like to assure you that the guided missiles currently converging with your ship are part of a special service we extend to all of our most enthusiastic clients. And the fully armed nuclear warheads are of course merely a courtesy detail. We look forward to your custom in future lives. Thank you." The voice snapped off. "Oh," said Trillian. Said Arthur. "Well," said Ford. "Look," said Zaphod, "will you get it into your heads? That's just a recorded message. It's millions of years old. It doesn't apply to us. Get it?" "What?" said Trillian quietly. "About the missiles." "Missiles? Don't make me laugh." Ford tapped Zaphod on the shoulder and pointed at the rear screen. Clear in the distance behind them, 2 silver darts were climbing through the atmosphere toward the ship. A quick change of magnification brought them into close focus, 2 massively real rockets thundering through the sky. The suddenness of it was shocking. "I think they're going to have a very good try applying to us," said Ford. Zaphod stared at them in astonishment. "Hey, this is terrific," he said. "Someone down there is trying to kill us." "Terrific," said Arthur. "But don't you see what this means?" "Yes, we're going to die." "Yes, but apart from that." "Apart from that?" "It means we must be onto something." "How soon can we get off of it?" Second by second, the image of the missiles on the screen grew larger. They had swung around now onto a direct homing course so that they could be seen. So that all that could be seen of them now was the warheads head on. "As a matter of interest," said Trillian, "what are we going to do?" "Just keep cool," said Zaphod. "Is that all?" shouted Arthur. "No, we're also going to take evasive action," said Zaphod, with a sudden access of panic. "Computer, what evasive action can we take?" None, I'm afraid, guys," said the computer. "Or something," said Zaphod. He said. "There seems to be something jamming my guidance systems," explained the computer brightly. "Impact minus 45 seconds. Please call me Eddie if it will help you to relax." Zaphod tried to run several equally decisive directions simultaneously. "Right," he said. We've got to get manual control of the ship." "Can you fly her?" asked Ford pleasantly. "No, can you?" "No." "Trillian, can you?" "No." "Fine," said Zaphod, relaxing. "We'll do it together." "I can't either," said Arthur, who felt it was time he began to reassert himself. "I'd guess that," said Zaphod. "Okay, computer, I want full manual control now." "You got it," said the computer. Several large desk panels slid open and banks of control consoles sprang out of them, showering the crew with bits of expanded polystyrene packaging and balls of rolled up cellophane. These controls had never been used before. Zaphod stared at them wildly. "Okay, Ford," he said. "Full retro thrust and 10 degrees starboard. Or something." "Good luck, guys," chirped the computer. "Impact minus 30 seconds. Ford leapt to the controls. Only a few of them made any immediate sense to him, so he pulled those. The ship shook and screamed as its guidance rocket jets tried to push it every which way simultaneously. He released half of them, and the ship span around in a tight arc and headed back the way it had come, straight towards the oncoming missiles. Air cushions ballooned out of the walls in an instant as everyone was thrown against them. For a few seconds, the inertial forces held them flattened and squirming for breath. Unable to move, Zaphod struggled and pushed in a manic desperation, and finally managed a savage kick at the small lever that formed part of the guidance system. The lever snapped off. The ship twisted sharply and rocketed upwards. The crew were hurled violently back across the cabin. Ford's copy of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy smashed into another section of the controls console, with the combined result that the guide started to explain to anyone who cared to listen about the best ways of smuggling Antarian parakeet glands out of Antares. An Antarian parakeet gland stuck on a small stick is a revolting but much sought-after cocktail delicacy, and very large sums of money are often paid for them by very, very rich idiots who want to impress other very rich idiots. And the ship suddenly dropped out of the sky like a stone. It was, of course, more or less at this moment that one of the crew sustained a nasty bruise to the upper arm. This should be emphasised because, as has already been revealed, they escape otherwise completely unharmed, and the deadly nuclear missiles do not eventually hit the ship. The safety of the crew is absolutely assured. "Impact minus 20 seconds, guys," said the computer. "Then turn the bloody engines back on," bawled Zaphod. "Oh, sure thing, guys," said the computer. With a subtle roar, the engines cut back in, the ship smoothly flattened out of its dive and headed back towards the missiles again. The computer started to sing. "When you walk through the storm," it whined nasally, "hold your head up high." Zaphod screamed at it to shut up, but his voice was lost in the din of what they quite as naturally assumed was approaching destruction. "And don't be afraid of the dark," Eddie wailed. The ship, in flattening out, had in fact flattened out upside down, and lying on the ceiling as they were, it was now totally impossible for any of the crew to reach the guidance system. "At the end of the storm," crooned Eddie. The two missiles loomed massively on the screens as they thundered towards the ship. "Is a golden sky." But by an extraordinarily lucky chance, they had not yet fully corrected their flight paths to that of the erratically weaving ship, and they passed right under it. "And the sweet silver song of the lark." Revised impact time, 15 seconds, fellas. "Walk on through the wind." The missiles banked around the screeching arc and plunged back into pursuit. "This is it," said Arthur, watching them. "We are now quite definitely going to die, aren't we?" "I wish you'd stop saying that," shouted Ford. "Well, we are, aren't we?" "Yes." "Walk on through the rain," sang Eddie. A thought struck Arthur. He struggled to his feet. "Why doesn't anyone turn on this improbability drive thing?" he said. "We could probably reach that." "What, are you crazy?" said Zaphod. "Without proper programming, anything could happen." "Does that matter at this stage?" shouted Arthur. "Through the dreams, be tossed and blown," sang Eddie. Arthur scrambled up to one of the excitingly chunky pieces of moulded contouring where the curve of the wall met the ceiling. walk on, with hope in your heart." "Does anyone know why Arthur can't turn on the improbability drive?" shouted Trillium. "And you'll never walk alone. Impact minus 5 seconds. It's been great knowing you guys. God bless. You'll never walk alone." "I said," yelled Trillian, "does anyone know?" The next thing that happened was a mind-mangling explosion of noise and light. Chapter 18. And the next thing that happened after that was that the Heart of Gold continued on its way perfectly normally with a rather fetchingly redesigned interior. It was somewhat larger and done out in a delicate pastel shades of green and blue. In the centre, a spiral staircase leading nowhere in particular stood in a spray of ferns and yellow flowers, and next to it a stone sundial pedestal housed the main computer terminal. Cunningly deployed lighting and mirrors created the illusion of standing in a conservatory, overlooking a large stretch of exquisitely manicured garden. Around the periphery of the conservatory area stood marble-topped tables on intricately beautiful wrought iron legs. As you gazed into the polished surface of the marble, the vague forms of instruments became visible, and as you touched them, the instruments materialized instantly under your hands. Looked at from the correct angles, the mirrors appeared to reflect all the required data readouts, though it was far from clear where they were reflected from. It was in fact sensationally beautiful. Relaxing in a wickerwork sun chair, Zaphod Beeblebrox said, "What the hell's happening?" "Well, I was just saying," said Arthur, lounging by a small fish pool. "There's this improbability drive switch over here." He waved it where it had been. There was a potted plant there now. "But where are we?" said Ford, who was sitting on the spiral staircase, a nicely chilled pan-galactic gargle blaster in his hand. "Exactly where we were, I think," said Trillium, as all about them the mirrors suddenly showed them an image of the blighted landscape of Magrathea, which still scooted along beneath them. Zaphod leapt out of his seat. "And what's happened to the missiles?" he said. A new and astounding image appeared on the mirrors. "They would appear," said Ford doubtfully, "to have turned into a bowl of petunias and a very surprised-looking whale." "At an improbability factor," cut in Eddie, who hadn't changed a bit, "of 8,767,128 to 1 against." Zaphod stared at Arthur. Did you think of that, Earthman? He demanded. Well, said Arthur, all I did was... That's very good thinking, you know. Turn on the improbability drive for a second without first activating the proofing screens. Oh. Whoops. Zaphod stared at Arthur. Did you think of that, Earthman? He demanded. Well, said Arthur, all I did was... That's very good thinking, you know. Turn on the improbability drive for a second without first activating the proofing screens. Hey, kid, you just saved our lives, you know that? Oh, said Arthur. Well, it was nothing, really. Was it? Said Zaphod. Oh, well, forget it then. Okay. Computer, take us into land. But, I said forget it. Another thing forgotten was the fact that against all probability, a sperm whale had suddenly been called into existence several miles above the surface of the planet. And since this was not a naturally tenable position for a whale, this poor innocent creature had very little time to come to terms with its identity as a whale, for it then had to come to terms with not being a whale anymore. This is a complete record of its thought from the moment it began its life till the moment it ended it. Ah, what's happening? It thought. Excuse me, who am I? Hello? Why am I here? What's my purpose in life? What do I mean by who am I? Calm down, get a grip now. Oh, this is an interesting sensation. What is it? It's a sort of yawning, tingling sensation in my... Well, I suppose I'd better start finding names for things if I want to make any headway, and what, for the sake of what I should call an argument, I shall call the world, so let's call it my stomach. Good. Ooh, it's getting quite strong. And hey, what about this whistling, roaring sound going past what I'm going to call my head? Perhaps I can call that wind. Is that a good name? It'll do. Perhaps I can find a better name for it later when I've found out what it's for. It must be something very important because there certainly seems to be a hell of a lot of it. Hey, what's this thing? Let's call it a tail. Yeah, tail. Hey, I can really thrash it about pretty good, can't I? Wow. Wow, that feels great. Doesn't seem to achieve very much, but I'll probably find out what it's for later on. Now, have I built up any coherent picture of things yet? No? Never mind. Hey, this is really exciting. So much to find out about, so much to look forward to. I'm quite dizzy with anticipation. Was that the wind? There really is a lot of that now, isn't there? Wow, hey, what's this thing suddenly coming towards me very fast? Very, very fast. So big and flat and round, it needs a big, wide-sounding name like... Ow, round, ground! That's it! That's a good name! Ground! I wonder if it'll be friends with me. And the rest, after a sudden wet thud, was silence. Curiously enough, the only thing that went through the mind of the bowl of petunias as it fell was, oh no, not again. Many people have speculated that if we knew exactly why the bowl of petunias had thought that, we would know a lot more about the nature of the universe than we do now. Are we taking this robot with us? Said Ford, looking with distaste at Marvin, who was standing in an awkward, hunched posture in the corner under a small palm tree. Zaphod glanced away from the mirror screens which presented a panoramic view of the blighted landscape on which the Heart of Gold had now landed. Oh, the paranoid android, he said. Yeah, we'll take him. But what are you supposed to do with a manically depressed robot? You think you've got problems, said Marvin, as if he was addressing a newly occupied coffin. What are you supposed to do if you are a manically depressed robot? No, don't bother to answer that. I'm 50,000 times more intelligent than you, and even I don't know the answer. It gives me a headache just trying to think down to your level. Trillian burst in through the door from her cabin. My white mice have escaped, she said. An expression of deep worry and concern failed to cross either of Zaphod's faces. Nuts to your white mice, he said. Trillian glared an upset glare at him and disappeared again. It is possible that her remark would have commanded greater attention had it been generally realised that human beings were only the third most intelligent life form present on the planet Earth, instead of, as was generally thought to be most independent observers, the second. Good afternoon, boys. The voice was oddly familiar, but oddly different. It had a matriarchal twang. It announced itself to the crew as they arrived at the airlock hatchway that would let them out onto the planet's surface. They looked at each other in puzzlement. "It's the computer," explained Zaphod. "I discovered it had an emergency backup personality that I thought might work out better." "Now, this is going to be your first day out on a strange new planet," continued Eddie's new voice. "So I want you all wrapped up, snug and warm, and no playing with any naughty bug-eyed monsters." Zaphod tapped impatiently on the hatch. "I'm sorry," he said. "I think we might be better off with a slide rule." Snapped the computer. "Who said that?" "Will you open the exit hatch, please, computer?" said Zaphod, trying not to get angry. "Not until whoever said that owns up," urged the computer, stamping a few synapses closed. "Oh, God," muttered Ford. He slumped against the bulkhead and started to count to 10. He was desperately worried that one day sentient life forms would forget how to do this. Only by counting could humans demonstrate their independence of computers. "Come on," said Eddie sternly. "Computer," began Zaphod. "I'm waiting," interrupted Eddie. "I can wait all day if necessary." "Computer," said Zaphod again, who had been trying to think of some subtle piece of reasoning to put the computer down with, and had decided not to bother competing with it on its own ground. "If you don't open that exit hatch this moment, I shall zap straight off to your major databanks and reprogram you with a very large axe. Got that?" Eddie, shocked, paused and considered this. Ford carried on counting quietly. This is about the most aggressive thing you can do to a computer. The equivalent of going up to a human being and saying, "Blood, blood, blood, blood." Finally, Eddie said quietly, "I can see this relationship as something we're all going to have to work at." And the hatchway opened. An icy wind ripped into them. They hugged themselves warmly and stepped down the ramp onto the barren dust of Magrathea. "It'll all end in tears, I know it," shouted Zeddy after them and closed the hatchway again. A few minutes later, he opened and closed the hatchway again in response to a command that caught him entirely by surprise. Chapter 20. 5 figures wandered slowly over the blighted land. Bits of it were dullish grey, bits of it dullish brown. The dried-out marsh, now barren of all vegetation and covered with a layer of dust about an inch thick. It was very cold. Zaphod was clearly rather depressed about it. He stalked off by himself and was soon lost to sight behind a slight rise in the ground. The wind stung Arthur's eyes and ears, and the stale thin air clasped his throat. However, the thing that was stung most was his mind. "It's fantastic," he said, and his own voice rattled his ears. Sound carried badly in this thin atmosphere. "Desolate hole, if you ask me," said Ford. "I could have more fun in cat litter." He felt a mounting irritation. Of all the planets in all the star systems of all the galaxy, many wild and exotic, seething with life, didn't he just have to turn up at a dump like this after 15 years of being a castaway? Not even a hot dog stand in evidence. He stooped down and picked up a cold clod of earth, but there was nothing underneath it worth crossing thousands of light years to look at. "No," insisted Arthur. "Don't you understand? This is the first time I've actually stood on the surface of another planet. A whole alien world. Pity it's such a dump, though." Trillian hugged herself, shivered and frowned. She could have sworn she saw a slight and unexpected movement out the corner of her eye. But when she glanced in that direction, all she could see was the ship, still and silent, 100 yards or so behind them. She was relieved when a second or so later they caught sight of Zaphod standing on top of the ridge of ground and waving to them to come and join him. He seemed to be excited, but they couldn't clearly hear what he was saying because of the thinnish atmosphere and the wind. As they approached the ridge of higher ground, they became aware that it seemed to be circular, a crater about 150 yards wide. Round the outside of the crater, the sloping ground was splattered with black and red lumps. They stopped and looked at a piece. It was wet. It was rubbery. With horror, they realised suddenly that it was fresh whale meat. At the top of the crater's lip, they met Zaphod. "Look," he said, pointing into the crater. In the centre lay the exploded carcass of a lonely sperm whale that hadn't lived long enough to be disappointed with its lot. The silence was only disturbed by the slight involuntary spasms of Trillian's throat. I suppose there's no point in trying to bury it, murmured Arthur, and then wished he hadn't. Come, said Zaphod, and started back down the crater. What, down there? Said Trillian with severe distaste. Yeah, said Zaphod. Come on, I've got something to show you. We can see it, said Trillian. Not that, said Zaphod. Something else. Come on. They all hesitated. Come on, insisted Zaphod. I found a way in. In? Said Arthur in horror. Into the interior of the planet. An underground passage. The force of the whale's impact cracked it open. And that's where we have to go, where no man has trod these 5 million years, into the very depths of time itself. Marvin started his ironical humming again. Zaphod hit him and he shut up. With little shudders of disgust, they all followed Zaphod down into the incline of the crater, trying very hard to avoid looking at its unfortunate creator. Life, said Marvin dolefully. Loathe it or ignore it. You can't like it. The ground had caved in where the whale had hit it, revealing a network of galleries and passages, now largely obstructed by collapsed rubble and entrails. Zaphod had made a start clearing a way into one of them, but Marvin was able to do it rather faster. Dank air wafted out of its dark recesses, and as Zaphod shone a torch into it, little was visible in the dusty gloom. According to the legends, he said, the Magrathians lived most of their lives underground. Why's that? Said Arthur. Did the surface become too polluted or overpopulated? No, I don't think so, said Zaphod. I think they just didn't like it very much. Are you sure you know what you're doing? Said Trillian, peering nervously into the darkness. We've been attacked once already, you know. Look, kid, I promise you the live population of this planet is nil plus the 4 of us, so come on, let's get in there. Hey, Earthman. Arthur, said Arthur. Yeah, could you just sort of keep this robot with you and guard this end of the passageway, okay? Guard, said Arthur. What from? You just said there's no one here. Yeah, well, just for safety, okay? Said Zaphod. Whose? Yours or mine? Good lad. Okay, here we go. Zaphod scrambled down the passage, followed by Trillian and Ford. Well, I hope you all have a really miserable time, complained Arthur. Don't worry, Marvin assured him. They will. In a few seconds they had disappeared from view. Arthur stamped around in a huff and then decided that a whale's graveyard is not, on the whole, a good place to stamp around in. Marvin eyed him balefully for a moment and then turned himself off. Zaphod marched quickly down the passageway, nervous as hell, but trying to hide it by striding purposefully. He flung the torch beam around. The walls were covered in dark tiles and were cold to the touch, the air thick with decay. There, what did I tell you? He said. An uninhibited planet, Magrathea. And he strode on through the dirt and debris that littered the tile floors. Trillian was reminded unavoidably of the London Underground, though it was less thoroughly squalid. At intervals along the walls, the tiles gave way to large mosaics, simple angular patterns in bright colours. Trillian stopped and studied one of them, but could not interpret any sense in them. She called to Zaphod. Hey, have you any idea what these strange symbols are? I think they're just strange symbols of some kind, said Zaphod, hardly glancing back. Trillian shrugged and hurried after him. From time to time a doorway led either to the left or right into smallish chambers which Ford discovered to be full of derelict computer equipment. He dragged Zaphod into one to have a look. Trillian followed. Look, said Zaphod, you reckon this is Magrathea? Yeah, said Zaphod, and we heard the voice, right? Okay, so I've bought the fact that it's Magrathea, for the moment. What you have so far said nothing about it is how the galaxy you found it. is how in the galaxy you found it. You didn't just look it up in a star atlas, that's for sure. Research, government archives, detective work, few lucky guesses, easy. And then you stole the heart of gold to come and look for it. I stole it to look for a lot of things. A lot of things? Said Ford in surprise. Like what? I don't know. What? I don't know what I'm looking for. Why not? Because I think it might be because if I knew that, I wouldn't be able to look for them. What are you, crazy? It's a possibility I haven't ruled out yet, said Zaphod quietly. I only know as much about it myself as my mind can work out under its current conditions. And its current conditions are not good. For a long time, nobody said anything as Ford gazed at Zaphod with a mind suddenly full of worry. Listen, old friend, if you want to... started Ford eventually. No, wait. I'll tell you something, said Zaphod. I freewheel a lot. I get an idea to do something, and hey, why not? I'll do it. I reckon I'll become president of the galaxy, and it just happens. It's easy. I decide to steal the ship. I decide to look for Magrathea. And it all just happens. Yeah, I work out how it can best be done, right? But it always works out. It's like having a galactic credit card, which keeps on working even though you never send off the checks. And then whenever I stop and think, why did I want to do something? How did I work out how to do it? I get a very strong desire just to stop thinking about it. Like I have now. It's a big effort to talk about it. Zaphod paused for a while. For a while there was silence. Then he frowned and said, Last night I was worrying about this again. About the fact this part of my mind just didn't seem to work properly. Then it occurred to me that the way it seemed was that someone else was using my mind to have good ideas with, without telling me about it. I put the two ideas together and decided that maybe that somebody had locked off part of my mind for that purpose, which is why I couldn't use it. I wondered if there was a way I could check. I went to the ship's medical bay and I plugged myself into the encephalographic screen. No idea what that is. Hi Ollie. How you doing? And thanks for stopping by. How's work going? Still can't pronounce encephalographic. Encephalographic, I think. I also need to sort out my mouth. It has to be very, very, very exaggerated in order to work. Ay. Yeah. So how are you doing anyway? A lot of multitasking. What are you doing? How much are you doing? I'm very glad I chose this hair because I think it works quite well. Oh crap. There we go. Okay. A bit worried before because my PC monitors had gone weird. There we go. Ugh. It's nice to take a short break from reading as well. I'm also going to fiddle around with this for a second. I hope work keeps going well for you at least. I hope it doesn't play up too much. I hope it doesn't tax you too much even. Ah, 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 yeah, ah. Oh, like a warehouse job. I see. Resting, rest is important when you're doing jobs like those. You never want to end up too exhausted, especially when you're working with a load of other people in a warehouse. I hope the rest of it goes just as smoothly. I hope it goes smoother than it is at the moment. Oh, Carl's Jr., like is that an American fast food place or a restaurant? I forget. Oh, okay. So it's can't tell whether that's better or worse than Amazon. I think it sounds better than Amazon. But then I've never worked for Amazon. I've just heard the awful stories. It sounds like it's not a place you would want to work, really. I definitely wouldn't. Because peeing in bottles doesn't sound fun. Especially because you wouldn't be able to wash your hands afterwards. Even if you had like some sort of hygienic gel stuff, it would still be super gross. Oh, I see. So it's just a big US chain. That would explain why I've not heard of it. We've only just got Wendy's opening up here. Well, I do want to go to Wendy's at some point. I've heard very good things about Wendy's. Sing with my mouth again as well. Ah, ah. Ugh. It's better, I think. Only just recently, like in the last 6 months or so, I think we've had a couple open up. We've got like two Five Guys here as well. I've never been to Five Guys. I've heard it's overpriced. But Wendy's I would totally try. I think it was mostly because of the Game Grumps that I've seen so much stuff about them and they all sound really good. I don't think our menu is quite as extravagant as the Wendy's menu though, which sucks because there are some really good things I've seen on the Wendy's menu that I would love to try. And I don't even like fast food. Or at least not from like major chains and stuff. I don't mind local fast food places when it seems less like fast food and more like well prepared food. See, I heard that, but I also thought that Americans went out to eat a lot, whereas here we go to the pub a lot, and eating out is like a special occasion thing. I think a lot of people tend to, at least I've heard in America, a lot of people go out to eat, like at night in the evenings with families. And I'm like, really? I think I just tend to, if I'm like once a week, maybe I might get fast food or takeout or something, like from a local place. But otherwise, I'd probably just end up getting or just end up making food, even if it's just easy food like soup. I do like soup. Ah, well, at least you don't make going to the pub a regular thing like we do. Not so much me. I don't go to the pub, but I still like eating. Well, we have that problem here too. Although I think it's equal parts food and beer and healthy drinking habits, which we seem to have a lot of. One of the first things people wanted to do after the... a pub is like a bar but without dancing and with less people hitting on each other. And usually full of old men. Or students. Or a mix. And depending on whether or not it serves food, sometimes a family. It's basically just a place that you go and drink. It's like a tavern. Except not all taverns look the same. So basically it's just somewhere that you can go and get food. You can get drinks, and sometimes you might get food. But not always. And usually it's not a good place for kids. I think I've actually got a pub around here, but I don't go to the pubs, so I don't drink. I mean, I wouldn't say we're constantly drinking, but drinking in general and going to the pub is just a common thing that people do in England and the UK in general. Going for a pint and whatnot. But I wouldn't know enough to be able to comment on it properly because I don't do that. Because I don't drink. But, you know, that's just me, so. I think most of the people I know like to drink. Or at least go out for a drink if they can afford to. But nothing really. That's the whole reason you go to a pub. Sometimes you go there for food as well if they serve food. But usually it's for the alcohol. So that's about it. There are pubs that are also family restaurants, but they're not usually very good. But you can order the same drinks there that you would do at a regular pub or a club or something like that. But yeah, the only times I've been to a pub, well, I haven't been recently because COVID. But aside from that, I did used to like going to a gin bar with a friend of mine. Although that was a pub, it just had a really good gin menu. So I used to go there with a friend, and we'd order like 3 or 4 gin cocktails each, and they were pretty good. I would like to do that again because I like gin. I just can't drink very much of it anymore. There are many things you can learn. Not all important, but man, it's very exaggerated when I look down. Be bending my whole head. Well, but yeah. So now you know. If you come here and get asked to go to a pub, you know it's just basically a bar. Unless they say, do you want to go get some food go get some food at the pub? In which case it can mean drink, but they probably just mean food. I do like wine, although it depends on the wine. All of my alcohol has to be exceedingly fruity. Like ridiculously fruity. And very, very sweet. I do like dessert wine. Also sparkly, fizzy, fruity wine. And also sparkly, fizzy, fruity cider. Like Copperberg. Copperberg's one of my favourite ciders. But I think all the wines I like are like the really cheap stuff that you probably wouldn't want to actually give to people. And you certainly wouldn't give to a friend if it was like their 50th birthday or something. You wouldn't want to give them a bottle of the wine I like. Otherwise they'd be very insulted and probably call you a cheapskate. Unless they were being polite, in which case they'd probably just thank you and give you a weird smile and then not invite you to any future endeavours. But I'd probably buy myself a bottle of it anyway. Like Summer Falls, I think. I do like Summer Falls. That was one of my favourites. Now I'm thinking about gin again. Yeah. But I do need a drink. Yeah. Ah. Twitching everywhere. I'm only semi-fruity. Well, I'll just have to teach you a lesson in consent. And also you'd have to somehow find a way to not only track me down, but also figure out where I live. And I'm trying not to let anyone know that. I am who I am. And on here, this is me. I'm way too entertained by my own hair. But I could glare as well. Yeah, I'm starting to see that. Behave yourself. Especially in these streams. Anyway, I should stop just staring at myself. I'm being very vain. Right, so anyway, where were we? Oh yes, so I was reading. I think I'll still stick to myself. I'm not a big fan of physical intimacy. But thank you anyway. I appreciate the thought. There is certain touching that I do not allow. Okay, have a good day at work and enjoy the rest of your. Well, I hope you have a good time. Or at least hate it less. One of the two. Take care of yourself, Ollie. Bye for now. Okay. I went to the ship's medical bay and plugged myself into the encephalographic screen. I went through every major screening test on both my heads. All the tests I had to go through under government medical officers before my nomination for the presidency could be properly ratified. They showed up nothing unexpected at least. They showed that I was clever, imaginative, irresponsible, untrustworthy, extrovert. Nothing you couldn't have guessed, and no other anomalies. So I started inventing further tests, completely at random, nothing. Then I tried superimposing the results from one head on top of the results from the other head. Still nothing. Finally I got silly, because I'd given it all up as nothing more than an attack of paranoia. Last thing I did before I packed it in was take the superimposed picture and look at it through a green filter. You remember I was always superstitious about the colour green when I was a kid? I always wanted to be a pilot in one of the trading scouts. Ford nodded. And there it was, said Zaphod. Clear as day. A whole section in the middle of both brains that related only to each other and not to anything else around them. Some bastard had cauterized all the synapses and electronically traumatized those two lumps of cerebellum. Ford stared at him aghast. Trillian had turned white. Somebody did that to you? Whispered Ford. Yeah. But you have no idea who, or why. Why? I can only guess. but I do know who the bastard was. You know? How do you know? Because they left their initials burst into the cauterized synapses. They left them there for me to see. Ford stared at him in horror and felt his skin begin to crawl. Initials? Burnt into your brain? Yeah. Well, what were they, for God's sake? Zaphod looked at him in silence again for a moment. Then he looked away. ZB, he said quietly. At that moment, a steel shutter slammed down behind them and gas started to pour into the chamber. I'll tell you about it later, choked Zaphod as all three of them passed out. On the surface of Magrathea... Chapter 21. On the surface of Magrathea, Arthur wandered about moodily. Ford had thoughtfully left him his copy of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy to while away the time with. He pushed a few buttons at random. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a very unevenly edited book and contains many passages that simply seem to its editors like a good idea at the time. One of them, the one Arthur now came across, supposedly relates the experiences of one Vit Vujagig, a quiet young student at the University of Meximegalon, who pursued a brilliant academic career studying ancient philology, transformational ethics, and the wave harmonic theory of historical perception, and then, after a night of drinking pan-galactic gargle blasters with Zaphod Beeblebrox, became increasingly obsessed with the problem of what had happened to all the Byros he'd bought over the last few years. There followed a long period of painstaking research during which he visited all the major centres of Byro loss throughout the galaxy, and eventually came up with a quaint little theory which quite caught the public imagination at the time. Somewhere in the cosmos, he said, along with all the planets inhabited by humanoids, reptiloids, fishoids, walking treeoids, and superintelligent shades of the colour blue, there was also a planet entirely given over to Byro life forms, and it was to this planet that unattended Byros would make their way, slipping away quietly through wormholes in space to a world where they knew they could enjoy a uniquely Byroid lifestyle, responding to highly Byroid-oriented stimuli, and generally leading the Byro equivalent of the good life. And as theories go, this was all very fine and pleasant until Vit Vujagig suddenly claimed to have found this planet, and to have worked there for a while driving a limousine for a family of cheap green retractables, whereupon he was taken away, locked up, wrote a book, and was finally sent into tax exile, which is the usual fate reserved for those who are determined to make a fool of themselves in public. When one day an expedition was sent to the spatial coordinates that Vujagig had claimed for this planet, they discovered only a small asteroid inhabited by a solitary old man who claimed repeatedly that nothing was true, though he was later discovered to be lying. There did, however, remain the question of both the mysterious 60,000 Altorian dollars paid yearly into his Brantis Vogan bank account, and of course Zaphod Beeblebrox's highly profitable second-hand Byro business. Arthur read this and put the book down. The robot sat there, completely inert. Arthur got up and walked to the top of the crater. He walked around the crater. He watched two suns set magnificently over Magrathea. He went back to the crater. He woke the robot up, because even a manically depressed robot is better to talk to than nobody. Night's falling, he said. Look, robot, the stars are coming out. From the heart of a dark nebula it is possible to see very few stars, and only very faintly, but they were there to be seen. The robot obediently looked at them, then looked back. I know, he said. Wretched, isn't it? But that sunset, I've never seen anything like it in my wildest dreams. The two suns. It was like a mountain of fire boiling into space. I've seen it, said Marvin. It's rubbish. We've only ever had the one sun at home, persevered Arthur. I came from a planet called Earth, you know. I know, said Marvin. You keep going on about it. It sounds awful. Ah, no, it was a beautiful place. Did it have oceans? Oh, yes, said Arthur with a sigh. Great, wide, rolling blue oceans. Can't bear oceans, said Marvin. Tell me, inquired Arthur, do you get on well with other robots? Hate them, said Marvin. Where are you going? Arthur couldn't bear any more. He got up again. I think I'll take another walk, he said. Don't blame you, said Marvin, and counted 597,000 million sheep before falling asleep again a second later. Arthur slapped his arms about himself to try and get his circulation a little more enthusiastic about its job. He trudged back up toward the wall of the crater. Because the atmosphere was so thin and because there was no moon, nightfall was very rapid, and it was now very dark. Because of this, Arthur practically walked into the old man before he noticed him. Chapter 22. He was standing with his back to Arthur, watching the very last glimmers of the light sink into blackness behind the horizon. He was tallish, elderly, and dressed in a single long grey robe. When he turned his face, he was thin and distinguished, careworn but not unkind, the sort of face you would happily bank with. But he didn't turn yet, not even to react to Arthur's yelp of surprise. Eventually, the last rays of sun had vanished completely, and he turned. His face was still illuminated from somewhere, and when Arthur looked for the source of light, he saw that a few yards away stood a small craft of some kind. A small hovercraft, Arthur guessed. It shed a dim pool of light around it. Who are you? Stammered Arthur. The man looked away. Again, a look of sadness seemed across his face. My name is not important, he said. He seemed to have something on his mind. Conversation was clearly something he felt didn't have to rush at. Arthur felt awkward. You startled me, he said lamely. The man looked round to him again and slightly raised his eyebrows. He said. I said you startled me. Do not be alarmed. I will not hurt you. Arthur frowned at him. But you shot at us. There were missiles, he said. The man gazed into the pit of the crater. The slight glow from Marvin's eyes cast very faint red shadows on the huge carcass of the whale. The man chuckled slightly. An automatic system, he said, and gave a small sigh. Ancient computers ranged in the bowels of the planets tick away the dark millennia, and the ages hang heavy on their dusty databanks. I think they take the occasional pot shot to relieve the monotony. He looked gravely at Arthur and said, This is the top result. Thank you, Google. Yeah. Anyway. He looked gravely at Arthur and said, I'm a great fan of science, you know. Oh, really? Said Arthur, who was beginning to find the man's curious, kindly manner disconcerting. Oh, yes, said the old man, and simply stopped talking again. Ah, said Arthur. He had an odd feeling of being like a man in the act of adultery who is surprised when the woman's husband wanders into the room, changes his trousers, passes a few idle remarks about the weather and leaves again. You seem ill at ease, said the old man with polite concern. No. Well, yes. Actually, you see, we weren't really expecting to find anybody about, in fact. I sort of gathered you were all dead or something. Dead? Said the old man. Good gracious me, no. We have but slept. Slept? Said Arthur incredulously. Yes, slept through the economic recession, you see, said the old man, apparently unconcerned about whether Arthur understood a word he was talking about or not. Arthur had to prompt him again. Economic recession? Well, you see, 5 million years ago the galactic economy collapsed, and seeing that custom-built planets are something of a luxury commodity, you see. He paused and looked at Arthur. You know we build planets, do you? He asked solemnly. Well, yes, said Arthur. I'd sort of gathered. Fascinating trade, said the old man, and a wistful look came into his eyes. Doing the coastlines was always my favourite. Used to have endless fun doing the little bits in fjords. So anyway... He was trying to find his thread again. The recession came and we decided it would save a lot of bother if we just slept through it. So we programmed the computers to revive us when it was all over. The man stifled a very slight yawn and continued. The computers were index linked to the galactic stock market prices, you see, so that we'd all be revived when everybody else had rebuilt the economy enough to afford our rather expensive services. Arthur, a regular Guardian reader, was deeply shocked at this. That's a pretty unpleasant way to behave, isn't it? Is it? Asked the old man mildly. I'm sorry, I'm a bit out of touch. He pointed down into the crater. Is that robot yours? He said. No, came the metallic voice from the crater. I'm mine. If you'd call it a robot, muttered Arthur. It's more a sort of electronic sulking machine. Bring it, said the old man. Arthur was quite surprised to hear a note of decision suddenly present in the old man's voice. He called to Marvin, who crawled up the slope, making a big show of being lame, which he wasn't. On second thoughts, said the old man, leave it here. You must come with me. Great things are afoot. He turned towards his craft, which, though no apparent signal had been given, now drifted quietly towards them through the dark. Arthur looked down at Marvin, who now made an equally big show of turning around laboriously and trudging off down into the crater again, muttering sour nothings to himself. Come, said the old man. Come now, or you will be late. Late? Said Arthur. What for? What is your name, human? Dent. Arthur Dent, said Arthur. Late, as in the late Dent Arthur Dent, said the old man sternly. It's a sort of threat, you see. Another wistful look came into his tired old eyes. I've never been very good at them myself, but I'm told they can be very effective. Arthur blinked at him. What an extraordinary person, he muttered to himself. I beg your pardon, said the old man. Oh, nothing, I'm sorry, said Arthur in embarrassment. All right, where do we go? In my air car, said the man, motioning Arthur to get them into the craft, which settled silently next to them. We are going deep into the bowels of the planet, where even now our race is being revived from its 5 million year slumber. Magrathea awakes. Arthur shivered involuntarily as he seated himself next to the old man. The strangeness of it, the silent bobbing movement of the craft as it soared into the night sky, quite unsettled him. He looked at the old man, his face illuminated by the dull glow of tiny lights on the instrument panel. Excuse me, he said to him. What is your name, by the way? My name, said the old man. And the same distant sadness came into his face again. He paused. My name is Slarty Bartfast. Arthur practically choked. I beg your pardon, he spluttered. Slarty Bartfast, repeated the old man quietly. Slarty Bartfast? The old man looked at him gravely. I said it wasn't important, he said. The aircar sailed through the night. Chapter 23. It is an important and popular fact that things are not always as they seem. For instance, on the planet Earth, man had always assumed that he was more intelligent than dolphins because he had achieved so much. The wheel, New York, wars, and so on. Whilst all the dolphins had ever done was muck about in the water having a good time. But conversely, the dolphins had always believed that they were far more intelligent than man, for precisely the same reasons. Curiously enough, The dolphins had long known of the impending destruction of the planet Earth and had made many attempts to alert mankind to the danger, but most of their communications were misinterpreted as amusing attempts to punch footballs or whistle for tidbits. So eventually they gave up and left the Earth by their own means, shortly before the Vogons arrived. The last ever dolphin message was misinterpreted as a surprisingly sophisticated attempt to do a double backward somersault through a hoop while whistling the Star-Spangled Banner. But in fact, the message was this: "So long, and thanks for all the fish." In fact, there was only one species on the planet more intelligent than dolphins, and they spent a lot of their time in behavioural research laboratories running around inside wheels and conducting frighteningly elegant and subtle experiments on man. The fact that once again man completely misinterpreted this relationship was entirely according to these creatures' plans. Silently, the air car coasted through the cold darkness, a single soft glow of light that was utterly alone in the deep Magrathian night. It sped swiftly. Arthur's companion seemed sunk in his own thoughts, and when Arthur tried on a couple of occasions to engage him in the conversation again, he would simply reply by asking if he was comfortable enough, and then left it at that. Arthur tried to gauge the speed at which they were travelling, but the blackness outside was absolute and he was denied any reference points. The sense of motion was so soft and slight, he could almost believe they were hardly moving at all. Then a tiny glow of light appeared in the far distance, and within seconds had grown so much in size that Arthur realised it was travelling towards them at a colossal speed, and he tried to make out what sort of craft it might be. He peered at it, but was unable to discern any clear shape, and suddenly gasped in alarm as the air car dipped sharply and headed downwards in what seemed certain to be a collision course. Their relative velocity seemed unbelievable, and Arthur had hardly time to draw a breath before it was all over. The next thing he was aware of was an insane silver blur that seemed to surround him. He twisted his head sharply round and saw a small black point dwindling rapidly in the distance behind him, and it took them several seconds to realise what had happened. They had plunged into a tunnel in the ground. The colossal speed had been their own relative to the glow of light, which was a stationary hole in the ground, the mouth of a tunnel. The insane blur of silver was the circular wall of the tunnel, down which they were shooting, apparently at several hundred miles an hour. He closed his eyes in terror. After a length of time, which he made no attempt to judge, he sensed the slight subsidence in their speed, and some while later became aware that they were gradually gliding into a gentle halt. He opened his eyes again. They were still in the silver tunnel, threading and weaving their way through what appeared to be a crisscross of converging tunnels. When they finally stopped, it was in a small chamber of curved steel. Several tunnels also had their terminus here, and the farther end... He opened his eyes again. They were still in the silver tunnel, threading and weaving their way through what appeared to be a crisscross warren of converging tunnels. When they finally stopped, it was in a small chamber of curved steel. Several tunnels also had their terminus here, and at the farther end of the chamber, Arthur could see a large circle of dim, irritating light. It was irritating because it played tricks with the eyes. It was impossible to focus on it properly, or tell how near or far it was. Arthur guessed, quite wrongly, that it might be ultraviolet. Slarty Bartfast turned around and regarded Arthur with his solemn old eyes. "Earthman," he said, "we are now deep in the heart of Magrathea." "How did you know I was an Earthman?" demanded Arthur. "These things will become clear to you," said the old man gently. "At least," he added with slight doubt in his voice, "clearer than they are at the moment." He continued, "I should warn you that the chamber we are about to pass into does not literally exist within our planet. It is a little too large. We are about to pass through a gateway into the vast tract of hyperspace. It may disturb you." Arthur made nervous noises. Slarty Bartfast touched the bottom and added, not entirely reassuringly, "It scares the willies out of me. Hold tight." The car shot forward straight into the circle of the light, and suddenly Arthur had a fairly clear idea of what infinity looked like. It wasn't infinity. In fact, infinity itself looks flat and uninteresting. Looking up into the night sky is looking into infinity. Distance is incomprehensible and therefore meaningless. The chamber into which the air car emerged was anything but infinite. It was just very, 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 very big. So big that it gave the impression of infinity, far better than infinity itself. Arthur's senses bobbed and span as, travelling at the immense speed he knew the air car attained, they climbed slowly through the open air, leaving the gateway through which they had passed an invisible pinprick in the shimmering wall behind them. The wall. The wall defied the imagination, seduced it and defeated it. The wall was so paralysingly vast and sheer that its top, bottom and sides passed away beyond the reach of sight. The mere shock of vertigo could kill a man. The wall appeared perfectly flat. It would take the finest laser measuring equipment to detect that as it climbed, apparently to infinity, as it dropped dizzily away. As it planed out to either side, it also curved. It met itself again 13 light seconds away. In other words, the wall formed the inside of the hollow sphere, a sphere over 3 million miles across and flooded with unimaginable light. "Welcome," said Slarty Bartfast, as the tiny speck that was the air car, travelling now at 3 times the speed of sound, crept imperceptibly forward into the mind-boggling space. "Welcome," he said, "to our factory floor." Arthur stared at him in a kind of wonderful horror. Ranged away before them, at distances he could neither judge nor even guess at, were a series of curious suspensions, delicate traceries of metal, and light hung about shadowy spherical shapes that hung in space. "This," said Slarty Bartfast, "is where we make most of our planets, you see." "You mean," said Arthur, trying to form the words, "you mean you're starting it all up again now?" No, good heavens, no," exclaimed the old man. "No, the galaxy isn't nearly rich enough to support us yet. No, we've been awakened to perform just one extraordinary commission for very special clients from another dimension. It may interest you. There in the distance in front of us." Arthur followed the old man's finger till he was able to pick out the floating structure he was pointing out. It was indeed the only one of many structures that betrayed any sign of activity about it, though this was more a subliminal impression than anything one could put one's finger on. At that moment, however, a flash of light arced through the structure and revealed in stark relief the patterns that were formed on dark spheres within. Patterns that Arthur knew, rough, blobby shapes that were familiar to him as the shapes of words, part of the furniture of his mind. For a few seconds he sat in stunned silence as the images rushed around his mind and tried to find somewhere to settle down and make sense. Part of his brain told him that he knew perfectly well what he was looking at and what the shapes represented, while another quite sensibly refused to countenance the idea and abdicated responsibility for any further thinking in that direction. The flash came again, and this time there could be no doubt. "The Earth," whispered Arthur. "Well, the Earth Mark II, in fact," said Slarty Bartfast cheerfully. "We're making a copy from our original blueprints." There was a pause. "Are you trying to tell me," said Arthur slowly and with control, "that you originally made the Earth?" "Oh yes," said Slarty Bartfast. "Did you ever go to a place, I think it was called Norway?" "No," said Arthur. "No, I didn't." "Pity," said Slarty Bartfast. "That was one of mine. Won an award, you know. Lovely crinkly edges. I was most upset to hear of its destruction." "You were upset?" Yes, 5 minutes later, and it wouldn't have mattered so much. It was quite a shocking cock-up. Huh? Said Arthur. The mice were furious. The mice were furious? Oh, yes, said the old man mildly. Yes, well, so I expect with the dogs and cats and duck-billed platypuses, but... Ah, but they hadn't paid for it, you see, had they? Look, said Arthur, would it save you a lot of time if I just gave up and went mad now? For a while the air car flew on in awkward silence. Then the old man tried patiently to explain. Earthman. The planet you lived on was commissioned, paid for, and run by mice. It was destroyed 5 minutes before the completion of the purpose for which it was built. And we've got to build another one. Only one word was registering with Arthur. Mice, he said. Indeed, Earthman. Look, sorry, are we talking about the little white furry things with the cheese fixation and women standing on tables screaming in early 60s sitcoms? Slarty Bartfast coughed politely. Earthman, he said, it is sometimes hard to follow your mode of speech. Remember, I have been asleep inside this planet of Magrathea for 5 million years and know little of these early 60s sitcoms of which you speak. These creatures you call mice, you see, they are not quite as they appear. They are merely the protrusion into our dimension of vast hyper-intelligent pan-dimensional beings. The whole business with the cheese and the squeaking is just a front. The old man paused and with a sympathetic frown continued. They've been experimenting on you, I'm afraid. Arthur thought about this for a moment and then his face cleared. Ah, no, he said. I see the source of misunderstanding now. No, you see, what happened was that we used to do experiments on them. They were often used in behavioural research, Pavlov, and all that sort of stuff. So what happened was that the mice would be set all sorts of tests, learning to ring bells, run round mazes, and things so that the whole nature of the learning process could be examined. From our observations of their behaviour, we were able to learn all sorts of things about our own. Arthur's voice tailed off. Such subtlety, said Slarty Bartfast. One has to admire it. What? Said Arthur. How better to disguise their real natures and how better to guide your thinking. Suddenly running down a maze the wrong way, eating the wrong bit of cheese, unexpectedly dropping dead of myxomatosis. If it's finely calculated, the cumulative effect is enormous. He paused for effect. You see, Earthman, they really are particularly clever, hyper-intelligent pan-dimensional beings. Your planet and people have formed the matrix of an organic computer running 10 million year research program. Let me tell you the whole story. It'll take a little time. Time, said Arthur weakly, is not currently one of my problems. Chapter 25. There are, of course, many problems connected with life, of which some of the most popular are: why are people born? Why do they die? Why do they want to spend so much of the intervening time wearing digital watches? Many, many millions of years ago, a race of hyper-intelligent pan-dimensional beings whose physical manifestation in their own pan-dimensional universe is not dissimilar to our own, got so fed up with the constant bickering about the meaning of life, which used to interrupt their favourite pastimes of Brocchian Ultra Cricket, a curious game which involved suddenly hitting people for no readily apparent reason, and then running away, that they decided to sit down and solve their problems once and for all. And to this end, they built themselves a stupendous supercomputer, which was so amazingly intelligent that even before its databanks had been connected up, it had started from I think, therefore I am, and got as far as deducing the existence of rice pudding and income tax before anyone managed to turn it off. It was the size of a small city. Its main console was installed in a specially designed executive office, mounted on an enormous executive desk of finest ultra mahogany, topped with rich ultra red leather. I guess it also had many leather-bound books and a desk made of rich mahogany. I wonder if that's where it came from. The dark carpeting was discreetly sumptuous. Exotic pot plants and tastefully engraved prints of the principal computer programmers and their families were deployed liberally around the room, and stately windows looked out upon a tree-lined public square. On the day of the great on-turning, the two soberly dressed programmers with briefcases arrived and were shown discreetly into the office. They were aware that this day they would represent their entire race in its greatest moment, but they conducted themselves calmly and quietly as they seated themselves deferentially before the desk, opened their briefcases and took out their leather-bound notebooks. Their names were Lunkwil and Fook. For a few moments they sat in respective silence. Then, after exchanging a quiet glance with Fook, Lunkwil leaned forward and touched a small black panel. The subtlest of hums indicated the massive computer was now in total active mode. After a pause, it spoke to them in a voice rich, resonant, and deep. It said, "What is this great task for which I, Deep Thought, the second greatest computer in the universe of time and space, have been called into existence?" Lunkwil and Fook glanced at each other in surprise. "Your task, O computer," began Fook. "No, wait a minute, this isn't right," said Lunkwil, worried. "We distinctly designed this computer to be the greatest one ever, and we're not making do with the second best." "Deep Thought," he addressed the computer. "Are you not as we designed you to be, the greatest, most powerful computer of all time?" "I described myself as the second greatest," intoned Deep Thought, "and such I am." Another worried look passed between the two programmers. Lunkwil cleared his throat. "There must be some mistake," he said. Are you not a greater computer than the Milliard Gargantua brain at Maximegalon, which can count all the atoms in a star in a millisecond?" "The Milliard Gargantua brain," said Deep Thought, with unconcealed contempt. "A mere abacus. Mention it not." "And are you not," said Fook, leaning anxiously forward, "a greater analyst than the Googleplex star thinker in the 7th galaxy of light, an ingenuity which can calculate the trajectory of every single dust particle throughout a 5-week Dangrabad beta sand blizzard?" "A 5-week sand blizzard?" said Deep Thought haughtily. "You ask this of me, who have contemplated the very vectors of the atoms in the Big Bang itself. Molest me not with this pocket calculator stuff." The two programmers sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Then Lunkwil leaned forward again. "But are you not," he said, "a more fiendish disputant than the great hyperlobic omnicognate neutron wrangler of Cirasonius 12, the magic and indefatigable?" "The great hyperlobic omnicognate neutron wrangler," said Deep Thought, thoroughly rolling the R's, which I did not, "could talk all 4 legs of an Arcturian megadonkey, but only I could persuade it to go for a walk afterwards." "Then what," asked Fook, "is the problem?" "There is no problem," said Deep Thought with magnificent ringing tones. I'm trying my best. "I am simply the second greatest computer in the universe of space and time." "But the second?" insisted Lunkwil. "Why do you keep saying the second? You're surely not thinking of the multicorticoid perspicutron Titan Muller, are you? Or the Pondermatic? Or the Contemptuous lights flashed across the computer's console. I spare not a single unit of thought on these cybernetic simpletons, he boomed. I speak of none but the computer that is to come after me. Fook was losing patience. He pushed his notebook aside and muttered, I think this is getting needlessly messianic. You know nothing of future time, pronounced Deep Thought, and yet in my teeming circuitry I can navigate the infinite delta streams of future probability and see that there must one day come a computer whose merest operational parameters I am not worthy to calculate, but which it will be my fate eventually to design. Fuchs sighed heavily and glanced across to Lunkwell. Can we get on and ask the questions? He said. Lunkwell motioned to him to wait. What computer is this of which you speak? He asked. I will speak of it no further in this present time, said Deep Thought. Now, ask what else of me you will, that I may function. Speak. They shrugged at each other. Fook composed himself. Oh, Deep Thought computer, he said. The task we have designed you to perform is this. We want you to tell us... He paused. The answer. The answer, said Deep Thought. The answer to what? Life, urged Fook. The universe, said Lunkwell. Everything, they said in chorus. Deep Thought paused for a moment's reflection. Tricky, he said finally. But can you do it? Again, a significant pause. Yes, said Deep Thought. I can do it. There is an answer, said Fook with breathless excitement. Simple answer, added Lunkwell. Yes, said Deep Thought. Life, the universe, and everything. There is an answer. But, he added, I'll have to think about it. A sudden commotion destroyed the moment. The door flew open and two angry men wearing the coarse, faded blue robes and belts of the Crux One University burst into the room, thrusting aside the ineffectual flunkies who tried to bar the way. We demand admission, shouted the younger of the two men, elbowing a pretty young secretary in the throat. Come on, shouted the older one. You can't keep us out. He pushed a junior programmer back through the door. We demand that you can't keep us out, bawled the younger one, though he was now firmly inside the room and no further attempts were being made to stop him. Who are you? Said Lunkwell, rising angrily from the seat. What do you want? I am Magic Thies, announced the older one. And I demand that I am Vroomfondle, shouted the younger one. Magic Thies turned on Vroomfondle. It's all right, he explained angrily. You don't need to demand that. All right, bawled Vroomfondle, banging on a nearby desk. I am Vroomfondle, and that is not a demand. That is a solid fact. What we demand is solid facts. No, we don't, exclaimed Magic Thies in irritation. That is precisely what we don't demand. Scarcely pausing for breath, Vroomfondle shouted, We don't demand solid facts. What we demand is the total absence of solid facts. I demand that I may or may not be Vroomfondle. But who the devil are you? exclaimed an outraged Fook. We, said Magic Thies, are philosophers. Though we may not be, said Vroomfondle, waving a warning finger at the programmers. Yes, we are, insisted Magic Thies. We are quite definitely here as representatives of the amalgamated union of philosophers, sages, luminaries, and other thinking persons, and we want this machine off, and we want it off now. What's the problem? Said Lunkwell. I'll tell you what the problem is, mate, said Magic Thies. Demarcation. What's the problem? We demand, yelled Vroomfondle, that demarcation may or may not be the problem. You just let these machines get on with the adding up, warned Magic Thies, and we'll take care of the eternal verities, thank you very much. You want to check your legal position, do you, mate? Under law, the quest for ultimate truth is quite clearly the inalienable prerogative of your working thinkers. Any bloody machine goes out and actually finds it, and we're straight out of a job, aren't we? I mean, what's the use of our sitting up half the night arguing that there may or may not be a god if this machine only goes and gives you his bleeding phone number the next morning? That's right, shouted Broomfondle. We demand rigidly defined areas of doubt and uncertainty. Suddenly, a stentorian voice boomed across the room. Might I make an observation on this point? Inquired Deep Thought. We'll go on strike, yelled Broomfondle. That's right, agreed Magic Thief. You'll have a national philosopher's strike on your hands. The hum level in the room suddenly increased as several ancillary base driver units mounted in sedately carved and varnished cabinet speakers around the room cut in to give Deep Thought's voice a little more power. All I wanted to say, bellowed the computer, is that my circuits are now irrevocably committed to calculating the answers to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. He paused and satisfied himself, now that he had everyone's attention, before continuing more quietly. But the program will take me a little while to run. Fook glanced impatiently at his watch. How long? He said. 7.5 million years, said Deep Thought. Lunquill and Fook blinked at each other. 7.5 million years? They cried in chorus. Yes, declaimed Deep Thought. I said I'd have to think about it, didn't I? And it occurs to me that running a program like this is bound to create an enormous amount of popular publicity for the whole area of philosophy in general. Everyone's going to have their own theories about what answer I'm eventually going to come up with, and who better to capitalize on that media market than you yourselves? So long as you can keep disagreeing with each other violently enough and slagging each other off in the popular press, and so long as you have clever agents, you can keep yourselves on the gravy train for life. How does that sound? The two philosophers gaped at him. Bloody hell, said Magic Thief. Now that is what I call thinking. Here, Broomfondle, why do we never think of things like that? Dunno, said Broomfondle in an awed whisper. Think our brains must be too highly trained, Magic Thief. So saying, they turned on their heels and walked out the door and into a lifestyle beyond their wildest dreams. Yes, very salutary, said Arthur, after Slarty Bartfast had related the salient points of his story to him. But I don't understand what this has got to do with the earth and the mice and things. That is but the first half of your story, Earthman, said the old man. If you would care to discover what happened 7.5 million later, 7.5 million years later, on the great day of the answer, allow me to invite you to my study where you can experience the events yourself on your sensotape records. That is, of course, you would care to take a quick stroll on the surface of New Earth. It's only half completed, I'm afraid. We haven't even finished burying the artificial dinosaur skeletons in the crust yet. Then we have the Tertiary and Quaternary periods of the Cenozoic era to lay down, and... No, thank you, said Arthur. It wouldn't be quite the same. No, said Slarty Bartfast. It won't be. Hiya, Red. How you doing? Sorry, I was in the middle of it. How you doing? What you been up to today? How you feeling? I saw you weren't feeling well earlier. Yeah. Yeah. No, said Slarty Bartfast. Said Slarty Bartfast. It won't be. And he turned the air car around and headed back towards the mind-numbing wall. Unless I missed Red because I was busy reading. Chapter 27. Slarty Bartfast's study was a total mess, like the results of an explosion in a public library. The old man frowned as they stepped in. Terribly unfortunate, he said. A diode blew in one of the life support computers. When we tried to revive our cleaning staff, we discovered they'd been dead for nearly 30,000 years. Who's going to clear away the bodies? That's what I want to know. Look, why don't you sit yourself down over there and let me plug you in? He gestured Arthur towards a chair which looked as if it had been made out of the ribcage of a stegosaurus. It was made out of the ribcage of a stegosaurus, explained the old man as he potted about, fishing bits of wire out from under tottering piles of paper and drawing instruments. Here, he said, hold these, and passed a couple of stripped wire ends to him. The instant he took hold of them, a bird flew straight through him. He was suspended in mid-air and totally invisible to himself. Beneath him was a pretty tree-lined city square, and all around it, as far as the eye could see, were some white concrete buildings of airy, spacious design, but somewhat the worse for wear. Many were cracked and stained with rain. Today, however, the sun was shining, a fresh breeze danced lightly through the trees, and the odd sensation that all the buildings were quietly humming was probably caused by the fact that the square and all the streets around it were thronged with cheerful, excited people. Somewhere a band was playing, brightly coloured flags were fluttering in the breeze, and the spirit of carnival was in the air. Arthur felt extraordinarily lonely, stuck up in the air above it all without so much as a body to his name. But before he had time to reflect on this, a voice rang out across the square and called for everyone's attention. A man standing on a brightly dressed die before the building, which clearly dominated the square, was addressing the crowd over a tannoy. "Oh, people who wait in the shadow of deep thought," he cried out. "Honoured descendants of Vroomfondle and Magic Thieves, the greatest and most truly interesting pundits the universe has ever known. The time of waiting is over." Wild cheers broke out amongst the crowd. Flags, streamers and wolf whistles sailed through the air. The narrower streets looked rather like centipedes rolled over on their backs and frantically waving their legs in the air. 7.5 million years our race has waited for this great and hopefully enlightening day, cried the cheerleader. The day of the answer. Hurrahs burst from the ecstatic crowd. Never again, cried the man. Never again will we wake up in the morning and think, who am I? What is my purpose for life? Does it really, cosmically speaking, matter if I don't get up and go to work? For today we will finally learn once and for all the plain and simple answer to all these nagging little problems of life, the universe, and everything. As the crowd erupted once again, Arthur found himself gliding through the air and down towards one of the large stately windows on the first floor of the building behind the dais from which the speaker was addressing the crowd. He experienced a moment's panic as he sailed straight through the window, which passed when a second or so later he found he had gone right through the solid glass without apparently touching it. No one in the room remarked on his peculiar arrival, which is hardly surprising as he wasn't there. He began to realise that the whole experience was merely a recorded projection which knocked 6 tracks 70mm into a cocked hat. The room was as much Slarty Bartfast had described in it. In 7.5 million years it had been well looked after and cleaned regularly every century or so. The ultra-mahogany desk was worn at the edges, the carpet a little faded now, but the large computer terminal sat in its sparkling glory on the desk's leather top, as bright as if it had been constructed yesterday. 2 severely dressed men sat respectfully before the terminal and waited. "The time is nearly upon us," said one, and Arthur was surprised to see a word suddenly materialise in thin air just by the man's neck. The word was Loonqual, and it flashed a couple of times and then disappeared again. Before Arthur was able to assimilate this, the other man spoke and the word Fushk appeared by his neck. 75,000 generations ago our ancestors set this program in motion, the second man said, and in all that time we will be the first to hear the computer speak. An awesome prospect, Fushk, agreed the first man, and Arthur suddenly realised he was watching a recording with subtitles. We are the ones who will hear, said Fushk, the answer to the great question of life, the universe, and everything. Shh, said Loonquall with a slight gesture. I think Deep Thought is preparing to speak. There was a moment's expectant pause whilst panels slowly came to life on the front of the console. Lights flashed on and off experimentally and settled down into a business-like pattern. A soft, low hum came from the communication channel. Good morning, said Deep Thought at last. Good morning, Deep Thought, said Loonquall nervously. Do you have, that is... An answer for you, interrupted Deep Thought majestically. Yes, I have. The two men shivered with expectancy. Their waiting had not been in vain. There really is one, breathed Fushk. There really is one, confirmed Deep Thought. To everything? To the great question of life, the universe, and everything? Yes. Both of the men had been trained for this moment. Their lives had been in preparation for it. They had been selected at birth as those who would witness the answer. But even though they found themselves gasping and squirming like excited children. And you're ready to give it to us? Urged Loonquall. I am. Now? Now, said Deep Thought. They both licked their dry lips. Though I don't think, added Deep Thought, that you're going to like it. Doesn't matter, said Fushk. We must know it, now. Now? Yes, now. All right, said the computer and settled into silence again. The two men fidgeted. The tension was unbearable. You're really not going to like it, observed Deep Thought. Tell us. All right, said Deep Thought. The answer to the great question. Yes? Of life, the universe, and everything, said Deep Thought. Yes. Is, said Deep Thought and paused. Yes. Is. Yes. 42, said Deep Thought with infinite majesty and calm. Chapter 28. It was a long time before anyone spoke. Out of the corner of his eye, Fushk could see the sea of tense, expectant faces down in the square outside. We're going to get lynched for this, aren't we? He whispered. It was a tough assignment, said Deep Thought mildly. 42? Yelled Loonquall. Is that all you've got to show for 7.5 million years' work? I checked it very thoroughly, said the computer, and that quite definitely is the answer. I think the problem, to be quite honest with you, is that you've never actually known what the question is. But it was the great question! The question of life, the universe, and everything! Howled Loonquall. Yes, said Deep Thought, with the air of one who suffers fools gladly. But what actually is it? A slow, stupefied silence crept over the men as they stared at the computer and then each other. Well, you know, it's just everything. Everything, offered Fushk weakly. Exactly, said Deep Thought. So once you do know what the question actually is, you'll know what the answer is. Oh, terrific, muttered Fushk, flinging aside his notebook and wiping away a tiny tear. Look, all right, said Loonquall. Can you just please tell us the question? The ultimate question? Yes. Of life, the universe, and everything? Yes. Deep Thought pondered for a moment. Tricky, he said. But can you do it? Deep Thought pondered this for another long moment. Finally, no, he said firmly. Both men collapsed onto their chairs in despair. But I'll tell you who can, said Deep Thought. They both looked up sharply. Who? Tell us! Suddenly, Arthur began to feel his apparently non-existent scalp begin to crawl as he found himself moving slowly but inexorably forwards toward the console. But it was only a dramatic zoom on the part of whoever had made the recording, he assumed. "I speak of none but the computer that is to come after me," intoned Deep Thought, his voice regaining its accustomed declamatory tones. "A computer whose merest operational parameters I am not worthy to calculate, and yet I will design it for you. A computer which can calculate the question to the ultimate answer. A computer of infinite and subtle complexity, that organic life itself shall form part of its operational matrix. And you yourselves shall take on new forms and go down into the computer to navigate its 10-million-year program. And I shall name it also unto you, and it shall be called the Earth." Foosh gaped at Deep Thought. "What a dull name," he said, and great incisions appeared down the length of his body. Lunkwald, too, suddenly sustained horrific gashes from nowhere. The computer console blotched and cracked, the walls flicked and crumbled, and the room crashed upwards into its own ceiling. Slarty Barfast was standing in front of Arthur, holding the two ends of wires. "End of the tape," he explained. Right, and I think with that, I'm probably going to leave it there for the evening, because I want to get some stuff done. And my throat's getting kind of sore. But, as always, I've quite enjoyed reading. And I always do love reading Hitchhiker's Guide. But we are almost at the end of the first book. It's volume 1 in a trilogy of 5. And they're all very small books, comparatively. But anyway, yeah, so I'm going to wrap it up here. And tomorrow, I think I'll be playing the rest of, what was it called? Layers of Fear, or rather Layers of Fear Inheritance, the DLC, because I want to know what happens there. And after that, we'll see. I've got some ideas that I want to do for Saturday. I wanted to play Chris Tales, or maybe a new visual novel I got, or maybe I'll just continue with Paradise Killer. But we'll see. I'll put up a poll and see what people say. Anyway, thank you for following along if you've been here, and thank you for listening. I always like reading. And I hope to see you again tomorrow. So for now, good night, and see you next time. Bye.